You are listening to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our sponsor, MSP-Ignite. MSP-Ignite offers a peer group experience that is unique to managed service providers in the technology industry. If you are serious about implementing a model for success through sharing and collaboration of best practices, this is the best way to do it. Head on over to msp-ignite.com to get more information. All right, on to the show. Welcome to this episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined by Greg Edwards of CryptoStopper and an MSP. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So in lieu of all of the little details of how people connect on LinkedIn, I'll jump right to the chase. You run a company that was in an evolution out of your MSP to help, stop ransomware. And I thought, what better conversation to have than, is there hope when it comes to ransomware?
And I would say absolutely yes. I mean, the MSPs and companies that are just sticking their head in the sand and saying there's no hope, we're going to get hit anyway, is not, I mean, it's not true. There is hope, and you can protect your network and your clients' networks from ransomware.
So I had an episode a few weeks back. I featured Marcus Random, co-founder of Tenable, and he had a lot of things to say about kind of in that zero trust mindset, where we go back to the late 90s, early 2000, you build websites with directories. And so some of the things he was talking about is like when a request comes in to go through a firewall, are you saying these are the only directories where these pages can live? And oh, by the way, they have to have these extensions and these are read-only folders. And one of the things he said to me is like, you go to the development team or the marketing team and they're like, well, that's too much work. He's like, how is it too much work to have, say, an organized folder structure? And then fast forward to where we are today, and we talk about network architecture and the things that our users do, whether it's with OneDrive or OneSync or whatever it could be that has file storage. And most people, by and large, do not have any sort of like, it's like in their head organized, but it's not necessarily. Is it part of this because we've gotten lazy because the search tools and finding stuff's easy, regardless of how we put it in there?
Well, and I think that that's part of it, but it still can be protected even in that unstructured data manner. So I love the zero trust framework.
Right.
But that is, zero trust is really difficult to get to with most clients. So put the right tools in place to be able to protect them however their data is structured. And I'm all about segmenting networks and putting obstacles in place for the attackers.
Right.
But it has to be usable for the users. And we as MSPs can put the right tools and have the right stack in place to be able to prevent those attacks, prevent ransomware, prevent the breaches, and train the users.
Right. So obviously we all talk about tools and products and services, and I think sometimes our heads spin, but I still have this thought in my head, and help me if because I started with like zero trust, and we both are in agreement there. And that's just not realistic. You don't come into a prospect and say, well, we're going to start with zero trust. And if what I see is legitimate, I'll whitelist it. Oh, that's Microsoft or that's Google or whatever. We're good there. But isn't that part of what actually does need to happen, to be able to go into a client and say, what are the applications that you use? Do you have an inventory list of what's approved or not approved? Because I mean, I don't know how many times I've done that with a client of say 8 or 10, and we spend 6 weeks trying to figure out what they're actually using for work.
Yeah. I mean, most networks that I'm seeing even now coming into as prospects, I mean, they're a complete mess. And there's, I mean, that's the brutal truth of where we are right now. And it's no wonder that there are so many ransomware attacks happening. I don't know if you've seen any of the articles on the director of the FBI talking about that the FBI right now is tracking 100 different just Russian criminal organization groups that have anywhere in the last week have they've been notified of anywhere from a dozen to hundreds of specific attacks just on the Russian attackers.
Right. I didn't see that one specifically, but I had a read one recently that was similar, but it was tied to was really targeting, like they could say this was definitively coming from China. So I'm guessing there's a whole bunch of these now that are starting to emerge where we're really talking about it in the media.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's so many attacks happening. I mean, I would think CEOs and MSP owners have to just be, I mean, their heads have to be spinning about when are we going to get hit? And that, to come back to your original question of, is there hope to be able to stop ransomware? Yeah. I mean, we as MSP owners have to get control of the tools that we're using and make sure that they're properly deployed and using. I mean, that's the thing that I think most, I mean, the tools that are out there right now are awesome. It's a matter of getting the right set of tools, getting the techs trained, and making sure that they're deployed properly, and then auditing and making sure that they're installed and that they're working.
I looked at a service the other day. It was a product the other day out of Tel Aviv, and their product focus was is the SaaS application configured correctly? And then taking that to a step further and saying, if I put a framework, CIS or NIST, if I put that framework and looked at it through that lens, where it's applicable, do the controls line up and satisfy that there's evidence to support not only properly configured, but also secure? And it kind of hit me, upside the head, because I'm like, okay, small client, 10, 15 employees, and they've got, let's just say conservatively, they have 10 legitimate applications. We know that's way more than that, but let's just say it's 10. I have to log in. If I'm their CISO, I have to log in to each one of those accounts. And if I'm lucky, check and verify that all of the users are properly configured, 2FAs turned on, because some of these apps don't even have a good, like, click this to run a report and see if it meets any sort of security requirements.
Most don't.
Right.
It's not like some don't.
Most don't. That's fair. Most don't. And I thought, man, if there's products and tools out there that do this, well, now I can start identifying what products and services I need to complement post a good configuration. Because I think to some degree, correct me if I'm wrong, but if an MSP's clients, all of the SaaS applications and their internal user profiles are configured correctly, we've probably eliminated 75% or more of the threat surface of the client, because we did what we're supposed to do instead of like, well, they want this done yesterday, so let's just turn it on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, but how do you do that?
Right.
How do you do that effectively as an MSP when most MSPs probably don't even know all the applications that their clients are running in the first place, right? So
and if you do, even adding them to a product or service that can give you that kind of visibility, how long does that take? Because it's not all at once. It's still one at a time to add them into the dashboard.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but again, I mean, take the big ones. I mean, make sure Office 365 is configured properly.
The ones that the hackers are looking for, right? Yeah. We start with these 5 top apps to go after, right?
Yeah.
You're using box.com. I'm not so keen on going after that one right now.
Right.
So we've talked a lot about, like, what are the things that should be done that aren't necessarily related to having hope against ransomware, but they contribute. Talk to me a little bit about how you came about with why CryptoStopper. And again, the audience is they're interested in what's out there, but really I know that as an MSP, and a lot of what, like you said this before, Kaseya says, made for MSPs by MSPs. And I think that's an important statement, especially when it's true. This was not like an overnight decision. You had malware bites and these other products before you came to the conclusion that you needed to build something different. What was that path? Because I think you found hope by this approach.
Yeah, so with CryptoStopper, so I've owned an MSP since 1998, and we started seeing ransomware attacks in 2012 in the MSP, and then I also, out of the MSP, started an offsite backup and disaster recovery company that was national, and we had, between 2012 and 2015, had 20% of our offsite backup clients get hit by ransomware. And so I knew that, and the engineers that worked for me, I mean, we all knew this was going to be a massive problem. And this was way back in 2015, 2016. And so we built actually a PowerShell script to deploy bait files and then monitor those bait files and set automation around firewall rules to then shun the offending machine.
Right.
So that was basically
20 machine isolation.
Yeah. I mean, that was 2015 version of CryptoStopper.
Sure.
And it took 9 seconds from ransomware actually running to be able to create, to detect it and kill it. And in ransomware terms, I mean, 9 seconds is an eternity. And It was still chewing through hundreds of files in that 9 seconds, but it was better than millions of files.
Right.
So that evolved over time. We actually converted then to C# and real development environment outside of PowerShell, and built a portal behind it so all the agents could be monitored from the portal. And then actually at the beginning of this year, just so that's an evolution from 2015
to
2021, where we actually launched now to the MSP channel and sell the product exclusively through MSP partners.
So along those lines, I think you bring up something interesting. Product aside, is that when, or your specific product aside, is that when vendors have the agent, and I don't know how many times I heard like, oh man, I'm just running another agent on my computer. And I'm like, yeah, but I'd rather have 30 agents running in my system tray than say one, I won't name the vendor, in my system tray, that it's like, man, ever since I put this on my computer, I feel like I have like no memory left. My CPU and fans are always going nonstop. Like, as long as that's not happening, I think that there's a rule of thumb that says I don't care how many things are in system tray, as long as performance doesn't tank.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, I think that as MSPs, I mean, at least for right now, we have to get over the agent fatigue, and just get the tool set that works properly and is going to stop not only ransomware but data breach and malicious actors in general. And that's, to me, I've been doing this since I think 2014 is when we standardized on a security stack, and it's modified since then.
But yeah, start somewhere.
But right. But having that standardized stack, making sure the techs understand how to use the tools and the tools are configured properly. I mean, I don't see any option other than that. And if it is 6 tools or 10 tools, then that's what it has to be. And that's, I mean, I've heard differing ranges of that 6 to 12 agents running is the norm.
And so like along those lines, I think it's really interesting that, you got a standardized stack. I think we talked about this before we started recording. this episode, and you chastise me, we should be recording, but the question that comes to mind is can you have too much when it comes to tools and services? Or maybe that's not how I phrased it, but we're defining a stack as an MSP that often involves more and more products and services in order to achieve a result that's, somehow we're reducing the number of people to do with more AI when we can. But there's a balancing act that I'm still struggling with, because I think about, like, I add whatever the product is to the stack. There is a percentage of FTE that starts to come into play that I think a lot of MSPs don't really consider when they're evaluating a new product. And I see it more commonly when you get into like the SIEM tools, like an Alien Vault type thing, where it's like, it's a pretty heavy lift to put it in. Maybe you can get some streamlined after the fact and reduce, the FTE overhead. But is there a thought process that you have when you're looking at whether it's a product that you've built or services that you're consuming, that you're like, how do I ensure that the people eyes on this doesn't become greater than the revenues to support it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that, and that is absolutely a concern and has to be. And the way that I've done that within my MSP is set a per endpoint price that's high enough to be able to absorb that, and then look at, as we're putting, because the heavy lift is on the front end, right? Of getting that stack in place and getting the SecOps team in place. That's where the heavy lift is. So you've got to look at what is that stack going to be? What's it going to take? Can we realistically do that? And if you can't, then you can't. But I would say then you're not going to be in business in 3 to 5 years, because for your clients are going to get hit, that you're going to be out of business anyway. So you might as well figure out what is that price point that allows you to be able to put the right tools in place, and then go. I mean, this sounds rough, but go fire the clients that aren't on board with it.
Right. That's and you and I both know that it's really easy to say that, right? It's really easy to say, I'm going to go out and fire 35% of my annual revenue that contribute to, say, 65% of my profit, because they're easygoing clients. They pay their bills on time, but they don't take security seriously.
Yeah. No, I agree. And for me, I did this within my MSP, and it was about a 40% that we cut.
And did your growth drastically improve in the profitability space as you layered this other stuff off with peace of mind after that?
It has now. I mean, that was 2014.
So I was going to actually ask that question. That you kind of answered it, but I'll ask the question anyways. In 2014, you talked about standardizing your security stack, which obviously included products and services that you didn't have in your stack before, as a result of what you were seeing, going back to 2012 and probably a little bit earlier, that we just didn't have a name for it yet. Yep. Fast forward for me, as you look at 2014 and on, your stack costs. I mean, we say this a lot in the MSP space. If you're not charging somewhere between $95 and $175, because that's not a broad range, then you're going to go out of you're going to be going out of business. And I think the actual way to say it is, like, if your margin of profitability on a per user model should be 35% or higher, I think it is, in order to stay profitable as things fluctuate. How big of an increase in cost to, say, per user did you see as you've gone from 2014 to now?
Yeah. So, and I'll give the number of what we charge $150 per endpoint for our full security stack and fully managed service. So, and that's today. Yep.
And where were you at in 2014?
So we started out at 90.
Okay.
And have ramped up to 150. And that's enough margin. And we're based in Iowa, so cost of living and hiring techs is a little less when we can hire techs.
Sure. Right.
But so if you're on the coast, it's going to be probably, I would almost say certainly more than that. But yeah, I mean, you've got to figure out for yourself. And I get that that's a hard calculation to do. And we just kind of said,
Throw
okay,
the blade of grass up, check the wind.
yeah,
Who's biting when I fish? Yeah, does the bobber go down?
right.
But again, I actually care very little about the actual number. I think it's more of what I wanted to hear was what had to change in your stack, which, I mean, to increase your stack cost to user by $60 in roughly a 7-year period of time with inflation's not terrible. So
Yeah.
to some extent, the cost factor, because you hear this a lot from MSPs, my clients can't pallet the increasing cost. What are you layering on so quickly that you think that that's a good idea to then go to your client and go, it's going up by $20 a month per user today?
Yeah. So it's the big things were the 24/7 security operations center, EDR. Really,
Right.
I mean, the managed
Those two.
EDR really were the big drivers of those cost increases that I think today are
You have
critical.
to have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It almost says you're not an MSP, in my opinion, when you say, and of course, there's all kinds of splitting hairs of what means an MSP or MSSP. But I think when you add a SOC, when you truly have a SOC, we go beyond knock and help desk. I think you're shifting the world that you live in as an MSP to something more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you see the data available and you have the right security professionals, which again is really difficult to get those people in place. So there are certainly challenges to get there.
Especially in Iowa.
Well, we did it though. Yeah, I mean, once you see the level of detail that you can get on what's happening with your clients' endpoints, you would never not use EDR.
Right.
Again.
So, okay. So we've kind of gone, I don't want to say in a tangent, but this hasn't addressed the one key question that we started on. Is there hope when it comes to ransomware? We've just talked about charging more money to layer more tools, but I think there's a silver lining here, and I want to hear from you before we wrap this up. Tell me what you think that hope looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, the easy, and I don't want to just plug my own product here, but
that's okay. I think that's fair.
I mean, CryptoStopper is an easy way to at least initially plug that ransomware hole. So we use bait files that we deploy throughout the endpoints and the server network system to detect actively running ransomware. And it's ransomware that's gotten past whatever other tool set you do or don't have in place. Any kind of scripted ransomware attack is going to be stopped with CryptoStopper. So, easy answer, just start there. But then then layer on those right tools that do include some variant. I mean, EDR is now not just EDR, it's all kinds of different things, but next gen AV that includes EDR, you got to get there and figure out how to get there. Otherwise, I mean, clients are just going to get hit.
So would you say that there's, like, aside from, obviously getting, CyberStopper, is to have, there's no excuses for not doing 2FA multi-factor authentication everywhere that you can. Like, if it's available for the product or service that's there, there's really no excuse to not implement it. Fair?
Absolutely fair.
And then, like, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, but do the big ones. Like, I mean, make sure Office 365, Google Workspace, anywhere data is housed, make sure those are taken care of first.
If it has a neon sign attached to it, make sure that either you turn the light off, as in it's not being used anymore, or put that in place.
Absolutely.
And then I would say that the third one is what you said, next gen AV / EDR. I think we got to be careful in that statement, because it's like, I think next gen AV is kind of critical in what those things do, but it also needs an EDR to go with it, because we can argue easily. I think products like Windows Defender, WebRoot, and some of these others, I've seen MSPs are like they're pulling them out and putting them in like nobody's business, because they're like,
It-
well, it didn't catch this one thing and this other thing caught it, and I'm like, well, what's the goal that that product really has, and is it doing that well?
right,
Because we want
right.
them to do everything, right?
Yeah, and there's not, I mean, that's the thing that we talked about earlier, that everybody wants that one silver bullet and doesn't want 12 agents
Right.
running. But
Right.
that's just not realistic today. I mean, that maybe I do see the consolidation
Sure.
happening, but I think we're 5 years out from that silver bullet kind of tool where somebody pulls it all together, and even then it's still going to be multiple agents.
And does that change all over again, right? So if you go back in time, let's say late 90s through like say 2010, it was a pretty consistent pattern. Your AV tools stopped things from causing the machines to stop functioning, where you got the blue screen and had to reinstall Windows.
Yeah,
It was
but
more about proving I could do it.
yeah, well, and the thing is that they didn't stop them back then even. I
Right.
mean,
True.
we just went and re-imaged the machine and moved on,
And it ran
right?
slow because of the
And
adware, right? Like it
yeah,
was but if you fast forward to today, my point was, like, back then we kept having products add stuff to the agent, right? Like it kept getting bigger and bigger, and it did more and
it,
more things. Added a firewall. Yay, I got a firewall. And then you fast forward, and it's like you fast gosh dang it.
got to go on
Well,
D&D.
this doesn't even have D&D. um you fast forward, and what's interesting is we're splintering out again to this agent. So like my thought process was, in
Yeah.
5 years, what's going to change in 5 years that has us starting all over again with 6 to 12 or 15 agents?
Yeah, I mean I see the point. I do think though that what's different now is that AV was never going to be the one tool, right? I
Right.
mean, it
Right.
was firewall and AV
Yep. Fair
up
point.
until 2010.
Yep.
That was enough. That did it.
Right.
And then that's when that agent sprawl started happening because of the unique kinds of attacks that we were all seeing, and AV and firewall was not enough. Well,
Right.
now all of these point products, which CryptoStopper is one of, all of these point products to solve those individually unique attacks are coming out. And so I think that that's the difference, that the big AV companies, and VMware is one that's doing it too, is consolidating all of these tools down and
Yeah.
looking at that holistically as, what are the next attacks that are coming. And so I don't know, one of us, I might be right or you might be right. Things are going to change,
I
right?
would argue we're both probably right. It's just a question of what is it going to look like that we can't predict the future on, because no one said. I remember 2015. I'll give you a quick example. I had a former employer that got hit with ransomware, and I got the phone call at like midnight, and like, hey, so what should we do first? And I'm like, I would call your MSP. And he's like, yeah, but he's like, do we call the police or the? And I'm like, we're just going to start with that. And it was interesting. It was a remote desktop exploit tied to, well, we won't even get into how the security could have been done correctly, but remote desktop session that had gotten, the hacker had gotten on that session with that user. And when he left the session, instead of logging off, he hit the red X and closed the window. And
Yeah.
at that time, they had a 45-minute session window of before it would log itself out. And in that 45-minute time, it basically took the whole thing, almost
Oh
everything
yeah.
down, alphabetically through folders, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because it ran in memory, when the machine logged out, when it officially logged out, the ransomware was technically gone.
Yeah.
Like you could not find a trace of this
Yeah.
at all anywhere.
Yep. Yep.
So we actually had to replace their entire hardware stack because it was living somewhere on one of those boxes, and
That
we
you
had no
didn't.
way to know which one it
Yeah.
was.
Yep. Yep. That was something that we saw a lot of in the offsite backup company, is that how do you figure out where patient zero is? And that's
Right.
exactly what one of the things that CryptoStopper does, is identify, not only in less than a second to stop it once it's actively running on the network, but then also tells you which machine has to go be cleaned up.
Right. Also, and as we wrap up, I think it's important to note that you've said something about your product I think is both unique, entertaining, and obviously very true. It's like we talk about doing phishing campaigns on the more social engineering, get someone to click on an email link. You're in essence doing the exact same thing by putting bait on a hook and letting it sit there. And for those that are not used to that terminology, think like honeypot. And I think that's the big one, is like to put a honeypot out there for them to target. And then you're like, hey, I've identified that this is happening and I know where it's coming from. And now we can be proactive.
Yeah.
And your product is essentially, you're saying, is almost red team exercise, right? Like you're doing a red team exercise with AI to when someone coming in. So it's not just a defense mechanism, it's also offense.
Yeah. Yeah. We actually have a ransomware simulator to run so that MSPs can actively run ransomware
Right.
within their environments to see that the tools are going to stop it when it happens. So, and to kind of bring this full circle of, is there hope to stop ransomware? Yes. I mean, it's the right tools and testing, just like with backup. Like what's the saying that amateurs back up and professionals restore?
Right. Yeah. Literally this week's episode, our episode was tabletop exercises. Who's doing them? And I was remiss to say I have the conversations all the time, but I wasn't doing them. So I have gone through some dramatic changes for me to say we're going to do the tabletop exercise. If we're going to do them for school buses, for an emergency, how do you exit a school bus? Well, good grief. A school bus is impacting, 25, 30 people that are on the bus. How many people are we actually impacting when we do a tabletop exercise that's potentially for an organization of, say, 5,000 people?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, I mean, it's having the right tools, knowing how to implement them, how to do those tabletop tests, no matter what it is, whether it's ransomware or backup or DR, whatever. But do them. I mean, but again, that's where, as an MSP, you've got to have that right cost model to be able to have the FTEs to handle that.
It's the saying versus doing, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's easy to say it. It's so much different when you have to do it, especially when you got clients that are like, you can bring them, how do you educate the unwilling, right?
Right.
So I just want to say, Greg, where can people find you, as this has been a great episode?
Yeah. So getcryptostopper.com. And then on LinkedIn, Greg Edwards there's several Greg Edwards out there. So search for Greg Edwards, CryptoStopper.
I think it's really funny that you said get CryptoStopper, because in my head, what I heard was get ransomware and then call me. Okay, that's not the case.
That's not the case. Hey, get it before you get ransomware.
Right on. So I want to say thanks again for those of you listening. This is MSP 1337. Have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thank you.